you mention big T or large T trauma and small T trauma. That word is has been bandied about, as you know, a lot over the last few years. It seems like everything can be or is a trauma for those of us who are not engaged in the conversations that you have been. What is the definition of the two, if you don't mind? We'll get started that way.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you what trauma isn't. First of all, trauma is not pain. It's not sorrow. It's not disappointment. It's not grief. It's not stress. All trauma is stressful and involves pain, but not all pain and stress involves trauma. And so people sometimes confuse the two, so to be trivial about it. It was, I went on a picnic last Sunday and it rained. It was traumatic. No, it wasn't. It just rained. And you were disappointed. You were frustrated, but you weren't traumatized. So on the one hand, the word is used a bit too loosely. On the other hand, where it really matters, which is when it comes to health, medicine, mental illness, the law, addiction, child development, it's hardly used at all. So even though all of the conditions I just mentioned involve a lot of trauma, the average physician, educator, parent, policymaker, psychiatrist doesn't even hear about trauma, let alone do they understand it. So, and yet trauma I think, is a huge dynamic in our culture. So on the one hand, we use the word too promiscuously. On the other hand, we don't use it where it's needed. So what then is trauma? Trauma literally means a wound. That's the Greek meaning of the word. And in this case, we're talking about a psychological, emotional wound that lasts until it's healed. And it keeps showing up, and its impacts manifest themselves in physical and mental health conditions, in most chronic diseases, in all mental health diagnoses, in addictions, in dysfunctional behaviors, in relationship problems, in self-concept, particularly grandiosity on the one hand, or self-criticism on the other. So it's just present in so many aspects of our lives, and yet it's not sufficiently understood or talked about where it really matters.
Yeah, you have mentioned many times, and even in your book, that there is a strange gap between the practice of medicine, and the science regarding trauma and stress.
Yeah. Well, let me mention a few examples. So in Canada, an Indigenous woman, let me mention two facts.
Mm-hmm.
Amongst women in jail in Canada, 50% of the incarcerated female population is Indigenous. They make up 6% of the female population.
It's huge.
50% of the jail population.
It's huge.
If you're an Indigenous woman, your risk of rheumatoid arthritis is 6 times greater than that of others. 6 times. This is despite the fact that prior to colonization, there was no rheumatoid arthritis in the Indigenous population. If you're a woman with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, your risk of ovarian cancer doubles. A British psychologist said that Richard Bentall, member of the British Academy, has said very accurately that the link between childhood trauma and adult mental health conditions has been as well established scientifically as the link between smoking and lung cancer. So on the one hand, the science is very clear. On the other hand, the average physician doesn't hear a single lecture on trauma in all their training. Not a single lecture, not in any medical school, anywhere in North America or anywhere in Canada, to be specific. This is despite the fact that trauma plays a significant role in all mental health conditions, in addictions. The average addiction physician never hears a lecture on trauma, despite the documented relationship between trauma and addiction. The average physician doesn't hear a single lecture on trauma, despite the documented connection between childhood trauma rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and a malignancy, and a whole array of other conditions. So where it really matters, as I said earlier, it's not talked about. Where it doesn't matter, it is talked about.
Why? Why is that? Why is that they don't hear a single lecture on trauma?
Well, Western medicine in general separates the mind from the body, so that when you go see a physician, they'll look at the physical symptoms, and I was trained as a physician. I know what I'm talking about. We were trained to look at the physical symptoms and the physical findings, including the ones identifiable on various tests. We're never asked to link those symptoms and those conditions to a person's emotional life. It's like the two are separate.
Hmm.
So if you go to a doctor with psoriasis, the link between psoriasis and childhood trauma is really clear. But nobody's going to ask you about trauma. Nobody's going to ask you about how you feel about yourself, about how you stress yourself. Same with rheumatoid arthritis. The link between rheumatoid arthritis and childhood trauma is scientifically really well established. Not only the coincidence of the two, but also the scientific or the physiological pathways by which emotional stress affects your immune system so as to trigger rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah, we don't hear about that mind-body link. So that's the first point. The second point is a lot of doctors themselves are traumatized
Hmm.
before they go into medical school. And if they weren't before they went to medical school, they're going to be sorely challenged when they do go to medical school. But nobody talks about that either.